Trust Solutions transaction is really three separate and distinct transactions. The first part of the transaction is where a grantor, in this case the seller, is going to place their property into a trust. Now, for a trust to be legal, it's going to need three parts. The first one is obviously the grantor placing the property into the trust. The second one is naming a trustee. Since a stack of papers really technically owns the property at this point, a trustee needs to be appointed so they can do the things that a human used to do. Now, a trust is always set up for the benefit of someone, in this case, a beneficiary. So our first transaction is the grantor placing their property into a trust, naming the trustee, and then, of course, naming themselves as the beneficiary. In the next phase of the transaction, a second beneficiary comes along. This would be the buyer of the property. The buyer comes in and doesn't actually buy the property, but does, in fact, become a beneficiary of the trust, and that's the second part of our transaction. Now, in the original part of the transaction, beneficiary number one had complete control over the property instead of the trustee. It's a beneficiary-directed trust. What we do in this transaction is when beneficiary number two comes along, we divide the control between beneficiary number one and beneficiary number two. They have equal control. It's not a voting thing. The trust can be changed, and frequently is, but both beneficiary number one and beneficiary two must agree, so they have 100% complete control, but they have to agree. If they can't agree, there are no changes made to the trust, and the trustee continues going on as normal. Now, beneficiary number two got involved in this transaction probably because they wanted to live in a property. They don't get that because they're a beneficiary. They get that through a lease. They execute a lease with the trust that they just became a beneficiary of, and that lease is a triple net lease, meaning they're paying the principal, the interest, the taxes, the insurance, and any association fees related to the property. That's the cost on a monthly basis. Now, one of the great benefits of this is, since they don't own the property, if the beneficiary, in this case beneficiary number two, ever defaults on these payments, the property can be taken back through an eviction process instead of having to do a complete foreclosure. Now, on a monthly basis, beneficiary number two is going to be making payments up to the trustee. The trustee will then forward payments on to the first trust deed holder, a second trust deed holder if there is one. He'll make the homeowners association payments if there's one of those. And if the loan is not impounded for insurance and taxes, he'll also collect those fees on a monthly basis. So what you really have are three transactions here: the creation of a trust, an additional beneficiary agreement, and a triple net lease arrangement between beneficiary number two and the trust that gives beneficiary number two occupancy rights to the property. If you'd like to download this, simply hit the attached link and you can download the presentation.